I was roused from my slumber by persistent knocking at my door. My servant entered with a jug of hot water and towels, as if I were some ancient relic in need of polishing. In silence he laid out these offerings, no doubt thinking I would consider myself grateful for such extravagant attention. Then, without a word, he unfurled my formal attire for the day. He turned to me, his face as still and cold as a granite. His gaze swept the room, taking in the chaos of the bedchamber as though it were the result of a minor war. With the air of one who has witnessed a grand tragedy, he bowed and left, no doubt muttering under his breath and rolling his eyes with such exaggerated flair that they might fall out of their sockets. The location of fresh sheets would be his next tiresome errand.
Meanwhile, I embarked upon the rather laborious process of ablution, wiping away the sticky remnants of the night. I dressed in the brocade satin suit I had chosen for the day, indulgent enough to be perfect for a joyous occasion, but not so opulent that I would outshine the main protagonists in the show. I took a pinch of snuff and stood in front of the mirror, waited for my eyes to stop watering, and focused on my image to check that my appearance met my high standards. Then stepped out into the corridor with thoughts of a hearty breakfast.
I followed the ceaseless chatter down to the ground floor, where guests, with all the grace of herded cattle, were being escorted by footmen into a wood-panelled dining hall, its long tables and benches suggesting a place of hearty sustenance. Amidst this scene, a large number of uniformed foxes scurried between the tables with a dexterity that could only be described as balletic. They took orders, delivered steaming dishes, and flitted about with the kind of practiced grace that would make any dancer envious.
Seraphina had assured me of their professionalism, and I must concede she was right. They were the very picture of efficiency. As I lowered myself onto my seat, a thought struck me, one both wildly impractical and rather deliciously tempting. Why not dismiss my entire staff in favor of a couple of these remarkable waiters? Two of them, charming, highly capable, and inexplicably stylish, could easily replace a dozen of my servants, saving myself the perpetual headache of those clumsy and rarely effective individuals. On one side, I found myself seated next to a tall, slender elf. We nodded and smiled politely. As he was in the middle of eating, I did not feel inclined to force conversation, which no doubt was a great relief to him, as elves and werewolves have never really hit it off. We tolerate each other and even have a genuine but grudging respect for each other's capabilities. But elves do have a reputation for excessive cleanliness and an absolute horror of parasites like fleas and ticks, which, according to common knowledge, that is, according to elven prejudice, are all lurking in the fur of even the most groomed werewolf. Out of mischief, I pretended to scratch my left leg absent-mindedly, and was most gratified and quietly amused by the amount the elf seemed to lean away. Of course, from my perspective, elves are the true offenders. One cannot stand within 10 paces of them without being assaulted by the pungent smell of soap and moral superiority. On my other side sat a plump-faced feline with short golden-colored fur with mottled brown markings. He had brilliant green eyes, long, thin nails, far sharper than any wolf's, while 2 impeccable rows of small pointed teeth made a brief appearance whenever he took a bite of food. Completing the ensemble was a cat's slender striped tail, which swung to and fro behind him with hypnotic insistence, as though it were conducting an invisible orchestra. A breed I did not recognize, but clearly a hunter by nature. Although, looking at this slightly overweight individual, busily wiping up the last greasy morsels of his breakfast with a slice of bread, I guessed his tree-climbing and pouncing days were far behind him. and from the style of his unusually tailored, lapel-less silk jacket with its high, tightly buttoned collar, I surmised he, like me, was a foreigner to this region.
Indeed, my theory was confirmed during our post-greasy bread conversation about who knows who and long and eventful journeys here. He had unspecified mercantile connections with the groom's family and originally hailed from lands even further east than they. I didn't pry into the nature of his trade, but the exotic quality of his attire conjured up fanciful images of sure-footed pack mules carrying bolts of fine fabric, sacks of rare spices, or boxes filled with precious stones, traversing high mountain passes, beset with unexpected rock falls and anticipated highland bandits. Romantic visions that no doubt would evaporate instantly had I found out he simply sat in some clerk's office all day checking inventories of goods on their safe arrival. Ah, another socially mobile merchant with the growing influence that is now the reward for those exhibiting shrewd social and business instincts.
Fantasia was indeed becoming a different place to the one my forebears knew. Soon political power will slip away from the aristocracy, attracted by the lure of reliably full money chests and properly balanced books. Civilization, it seems, is ever in motion, and like my feline acquaintance's tail, it rarely moves in any direction that pleases me.
These private musings were interrupted by the appearance of a fox armed with a slate and chalk, the very image of vulpine poise. He proceeded to recite the morning's offerings from the kitchen. I selected a repast of bacon, boiled eggs, and that most Gothic of indulgences, blood-pudding sausage, accompanied by honeyed toast, cheese, and tea of heroic strength, adulterated with cow's milk. He accepted my order, turned smartly upon his paws, and trotted down the hall, disappearing through a doorway. The pampered cat and I resumed our conversation. Soon thereafter a large pewter tray appeared, with generously laden fine porcelain tableware and a gleaming silver teapot. My waiter placed everything before me, tucked the tray under his arm, and, with a modest bow, left me to officially introduce myself to my waiting breakfast. On leaving the dining hall, feeling spiritually uplifted, morally ambiguous, and comfortably full, I was waylaid by one of the establishment's more reptilian footmen, who informed me, with the precision of a tax collector, that the morning's procedure had been arranged thus. At 11 of the clock precisely, guests were to assemble in the main hall and be guided toward the waiting carriages. Seraphina, ever the apostle of efficiency, had decreed that all conveyances were to be held in common, thus ushering in a brief but glorious age of forced vehicular fraternity, or, as she might call it, common sense. 4 females, corseted into mutual suffering, were to share a carriage, the excess of their skirts making any additional personal space a theoretical concept. The gentlemen, naturally less encumbered by fashion or delicacy, were to be packed 6 or 8 to a conveyance, like cigars in a box. Any servants or ushers not dispatched earlier in carts would complete the arrangement by ornamenting the roofs, a makeshift but practical decision that would give the procession the aesthetic of particularly well-dressed haystacks in motion. I was assured that the weather was fine, though I was cautioned to bring a warm cloak, as the grove, perched atop its hill, might well be somewhat breezy. Returning to my room, where I performed the customary morning ritual of fortitude, a brief consultation with the chamber pot, that humble yet indispensable companion of civilization. One should always face the day relieved of both doubt and unnecessary burdens. Having thus secured my composure, I unwrapped my ceremonial sword, a weapon whose purpose was more than just aesthetic, and fastened it to my side with the air of one expecting compliments rather than combat.
fetched my riding cloak, and into a small hip flask I decanted the last of the brandy, that most consoling of moral supports, and slipped it into a pocket. A quick glance in the mirror confirmed that I was still tolerably handsome. Thus reassured, I descended to join the others. The grand hall, transformed overnight into a botanical riot, overflowed with floral arrangements. Here maidservants flitted about their mistresses like nervous bees attending particularly demanding flowers, smoothing ruffs, subduing rebellious silks, and adjusting bonnets so laden with ribbons and blooms that one could scarcely tell where fashion ended and botany began. The gentlemen, by contrast, offered a spectacle of studied monotony. Clad in the same dreary black suits and coats, they clustered in groups, their conversation as colorless as their attire. It is a curious feature of the male sex that, given every liberty of choice, it will dress precisely like a funeral. A few among the assembled, who possessed either rank or distinguished military service, had taken the bold step of sporting regimental attire, so polished and plumed, one might have mistaken them for operatic generals rather than practical combatants. Unseen servants had clearly labored tirelessly all night, as the breastplates gleamed like vanity itself. My own ensemble, a blue silk suit embroidered with the sort of detail that suggests both taste and trouble, was entirely proper for the occasion. Which is to say, entirely improper by the standards of my unadventurous breed. I could feel the collective eyebrow of tradition arching in moral disapproval. The non-lupine guests were made of livelier fabric, both literally and figuratively. Their ceremonial garb shimmered in every hue, suggesting far-off lands where color had not yet been declared vulgar, and flamboyance was not a social misdemeanor. Compared to their exuberant finery, werewolf taste seemed a kind of exercise, both in practicality and penance. Black leather, black fur, and the occasional heroic concession to hard-wearing gray wool. A curious tragedy that creatures with such magnificent pelts should have such a limited imagination for what to wear over them.